Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at a second submission by Carol of her horse Beau. Now, Beau is a horse that we've seen one other submission from, and she's been doing a real good job with him, pointing out that she reports that it's been quite a bad weather year for them over there, and she's just now getting the horses back into shape after a long period of a lot of wet weather and feet problems and this sort of thing. But of course, I'm reminded once more of just how much good work you can get done in a walk, and if that's what you can if that's the only thing you can get done, you can still get a horse pretty in shape just walking them as we used to do, preparing horses for the hunt field in the old days. So this is all looking quite good. She's mentioning also that the horse sometimes is a little ring sour and is happily taking the horse out on trails and that sort of thing, and that's exactly right. There's no problem with that whatsoever. Of course, remembering that most ring sourness in horses just becomes from them, getting bored or being over-aided, so to speak, or forced against the aids. People will often say to me, well, my horse hates doing dressage but loves riding on the trail. Well, of course, that tells me right away is the person probably gets in the dressage ring and starts opposing the aids and trying to pull the horse's neck in and all the things that we see being done in the name of so-called dressage these days. And of course, the result is sour horses. When you see horses constantly wringing their tails and pinning their ears back and grinding their teeth, they're trying to tell you something. The more extreme horses, are the ones that will actually start getting rid of people and things like this and become very aggressive towards humans at times. I've seen horses become amazingly aggressive that have been forced in dressage. However, a happy horse like this, who's just being allowed to stretch and swing over his back, even in the ring and this sort of thing, we do have to keep it interesting. That's why you'll hear me talk about very often with horses that, while we do all the exercises in the same order, we do them in different places, so we don't really repeat everything exactly the same way. We look for variations, as in the leg yield. You can leg yield from the center, you can leg yield from the outside, you can leg yield on a circle, you can leg yield down the long side, or in a reverse position. So there's all kinds of different things we can do to keep changing it up, even though the exercises themselves must always come in the same order. That is, we start with a leg yield, then we go to shoulder ins, and then half passes or haunches in. And we do that same series through all three gaits as the horse develops, so that we can keep it interesting for the horse. And I can see you there trying to activate the horse a little bit and wants to go into a little bit of a jiggy walk, but that's exactly what you're doing, just the right thing. Now, I would like you to see you, when he kind of jigs a little bit, you have a tendency to pull your shoulders back, forward rather, and what I'd really like to see you do when he does that is lift your chest up and flatten those shoulder blades in your back and actually come back with your shoulders rather than forward. So just a little something to think about. But what I'm seeing here is a good active walk, and certainly beginning to stretch very nicely into the contact. Now we can see that this horse has a ways to go in terms of development. When we see the horse come by, when we see the horse in silhouette there, you can see the horse still has a bit of a, back is still a little drop there behind the saddle, as we can see that, and in the belly I can see is still a little drop. But once again, all that will improve if you keep just doing what you're doing, and even if you did nothing but walk, the horse would improve. So that's the big thing to take away, is just to remember that you're really not doing anything constructive with the horse until you're getting it over its back. And once you do, then pretty much everything we do is constructive work for the horse. That is, any kind of shoulder in circles, even just going out on a trail, which is exactly how you should ride on a trail. There's no difference between riding a horse out and riding a horse in. And that's one of the things people need to get in their minds, that, we all tend to want to sort of concentrate the work when we ride in an arena, when we're schooling the horse, and we tend to get too intense about it. And really, we should have that same casualness as we approach it inside the ring as we do outside the ring. That is, there's never any time that we want to overpress the horse, overwork them, and overcompress them, trying to get a false frame, this sort of things. And in that way, the horses stay happy in the work in the ring. But once again, this walk looks quite good here. Could be over tracking a little more, and I think it does as it begins to stretch down, but you're certainly on the right track with everything you're doing here. There's not any horse that doesn't need to stretch. And once again, that's what I keep trying to emphasize to people, is that once you get the foundation work and you can get the horse to stretch into the contact, and just know that that's what work that you do. We start at the same place every day, no matter how high a horse goes in its training and to what level. They all begin in the same place, that is stretched all the way down and working over their top line. That develops into collection in time. But once again, always remembering that we start at the same place every day with every horse that is stretched all the way down, get it working over its back, and then we gradually bring it up. And we certainly don't bring a horse just like a marathon runner rather, doesn't go out and run a marathon every day. We don't work horses at their highest level of performance every day. Once again, that's what's led to so many lame horses in dressage and jumping, is that we see jumping people today who literally jump their horses every day. And if you jump your horse every day, there's certainly not going to be much horse left in a very short period of time. So what good jumper riders know, for instance, is that most of their time is spent developing the horse's balance and its rideability, and then simply putting it in front of fences every now and then to test that. And especially once the horse has really been a school jumper, we really don't need to jump them much at all. We need to keep them fresh, we need to keep them sound so that we go in the jumper ring, we have a sound, safe horse to go around on. A good leg yield there. Carol's done a really good job with this horse, and once again we can see all the old issues there when the horse goes by in silhouette that hopefully in time will begin to improve, as I'm sure they will, and probably have already. Now this is a good walk for this horse. Now once again, it's all relative to the kind of horse that we have. We can see this horse is, not a horse with a great deal of flexion in its hocks. So it's never going to have the kind of giant step that some other horse that has more flexion in its hock is going to have. But still, every horse that we ride, there's an optimal position for, an optimal degree of engagement over the back that we can get in any given day. And when we get that, everything will improve. And once again, that's the biggest problem, that people are fooled by these very expensive horses that are these expensive leg movers. Always remember that in dressage, the whole point of dressage is the horse must thrust and lift you off the ground, not pull you around by its front shoulders. And so once again, once a good rider understands how the body functions, it doesn't take much to look at any horse and see how they've been trained. That is, if they're hollow and sway back, you can really see it. But even there, even if they haven't gotten that far, you can, in very early stages, you can begin to see in front of the hips there, how the back begins to drop down, where it's beginning to come. The spine is actually beginning to sort of disconnect from the hips in the back. And that's what causes kissing spine and all these kinds of things. But of course, the good news is that all that is, if the horse isn't just dead lame, if it can still be worked, it can be improved. And sometimes that just depends a lot of walk work, like Carol's doing here with this horse. And this is all looking really good, quite rhythmic, and once again, for this horse and the type of horse that it is, that's really quite a good walk. It's rhythmic. It's tracking under the body pretty much to the degree that it can. It could maybe get a little lower there and track over a little bit more, but really that's quite good. Right about there is starting to be about what this horse can do. And once again, you can see that this horse is a horse with a straighter type hind leg. It's not to say that it's completely straight. But once again, even those kind of horses, what we have to understand is the less physically talented the horse is, the more it needs dressage. As many of you have heard me say many times, if you go back, and there's nothing uglier than a badly trained Lipizziner, for instance, when we see them that have been gone upside, because you can clearly see right from the beginning how strange the horse looks if it isn't working over its back. So we can often be fooled by some of the horses we have today that are just bred so well, their conformations, once again, almost look like a trained horse when they come out of the womb. But the problem is that if we just ride them and don't do the same kind of work, they too will soon drop their backs and become hollow. And actually, I think in many ways, because they are such big movers, they're even more prone to injury than the ones that are not such good movers. Really nice rhythm in the walk here. Everything I'm seeing here has been quite good. I like how your leg yield back to the rail there. Always keeping the rhythm going. And remember, that's the most important thing. When you see riders that are constantly stop and go, pull the horse back, rein back, all this kind of stuff, or even the kind of jumper rider who you see coming down to the fence, constantly pulling back on the neck of the horse, and trying to pull them into something they think is collection. This idea of pulling a horse back onto their hindquarters, which doesn't really work at all. I mean, you can jack a horse up and get it so it springs off its shoulders with this kind of franticness, but that's a very dangerous way to jump horses. Witnessed by how many people are getting hurt these days trying to do it. A really good walk here, Carol. This is really good rhythm. Everything is stretching really down to where you want it to be. This is really, really good work. And once again, just know that if you can do this, ultimately you can do anything else on the back of a horse. The hardest thing in all of riding is to grasp and understand how how the horse's body itself must function in order for us to ride safely. That is, it must combine its two ends by working over its top line. And once again, that's why you would never see people, on saddlebreds and things like this ever riding out cross country. Or even doing much of turns and these sort of things. And sadly, that's what we've seen. Dressage has turned into more of something that looks much more like saddlebred. I call it saddlebred pattern riding. If you have one of these super expensive horses that, with all this leg movement that fools people. But the thing to look at, once again, is whether the horse is thrusting it. Is the horse, what you have to ask yourself when you see these horses, are they just pulling their legs up, or are they pushing off the ground and elevating their forehand, which is what real collection is, or are they just lifting their legs up? That's the most important thing that we need to learn to discern as riders and trainers. Because, of course, all the movements of dressage are wonderful for horses if they're done correctly. But if they're done incorrectly, they will destroy the horse, which is exactly why we see so many horses being, over-injected these days. So that was all really good walk work, Carol. And once again, moving right in here to the trot. Everything is looking good here. You're doing a great job. I like how you're just letting your hands be wide. And once again, people realize that, once again, this is not how you ride in the show ring, but it's just a technique that we use to begin to get a consistent contact with the horse, and also to teach the rider to have a consistent, light feel of the horse's mouth. Even when we lunge, that's important. If you watch my lunging videos about how we talk about how lunging is really just riding from the ground and learning to keep that slack out of the rein and get the horse to move into the contact on the lunge line, sets us up for being able to do the exact same thing when we're riding. Good trot work here. And once again, for this horse, this is a horse that's not particularly built with a lot of flexion in its hocks, but it's doing quite well. Now I feel here we could get a little bit deeper in the stretch, which I think you do achieve here as we go on. So once again, this is all looking really good. So just notice the deeper the horse stretches that head and neck out forward, how much more easily the hind leg is able to flex that hock. Once again, this isn't a horse with a lot of flexion in its hocks naturally, as a lot of quarter horses and these types of horses do not have. But once again, that means they need this work even more. Any horse that, if the horse is, as a hollow horse, let's say we're calling it a 3-mover, if you get it working over its back, it's going to be a 6 or 7-mover, just like we see with this one. Pretty good swing there. Still like to see the neck a little bit deeper, but it's swinging quite nicely. We don't really see any thrust off the ground. That is, the hind leg isn't really pushing it, but the first thing it has to do is just get under the body before it can begin to thrust the body and begin to lift the forehand. So once again, that's why if you're ever on a horse and you hear it forging, what's happening is the horse is not working through its back, so you're trying to push it through, but it hasn't got enough strength to lift its forehand off the ground. That is, there's not enough thrust in the hind legs. That's what lifts. Every time a hind leg that's engaged, pushes up and into the back, it lifts the forehand a little bit, and that's what allows horses to move without forging. So always remember that. So if you have a horse that's forging a lot when you're riding it, it's either not over its back and you're trying to push it too fast, or it simply hasn't, or it's over its back and simply hasn't got enough strength to be able to lift enough yet. And those would be both cases when you want to go back to the work on the lunge line. But of course, our cardinal rule is once you can get the horse to stretch in the walk, as Carol was able to do in the beginning of this work, then we don't need to lunge every day. So that's our general rule. Once we can get on the horse and stretch it calmly in the walk, then we don't have to do the lunging. That's not to say, however, a horse at this level, as Carol is doing, she's still lunging this horse a few days a week, and that's exactly what she and you should do. All good work here, and what I really like is how rhythmic this has all been. The flow has never stopped moving forward throughout this entire exercise, and that's exactly what we want to see have happen. Now, sometimes, Carol, also you could just as we did in the seated position, Just lift your chest up a little bit and bring your shoulder blades back a little bit, and I think you'd have a little easier time getting this horse through just a little bit more. So just a little more of a stretch up. And I don't see anything that worries me here. You know, you're using your legs a bit there, but you are remembering to stop using your leg. That is, you know, we don't want to just use the leg constantly. Even if it's only for stride, we have to give the horse moments and we do nothing else. So try to find those moments when everything feels good and just stop aiding, even if it's only for a few strides at a time. But what you're doing here is very, very good work for this horse at this level. I still like to see the stretch. Now you can see here when you're trying to do that leg yield, it got a little too slow and the horse began to lose its hindquarters. So always remember in those exercises that the rhythm is the most important thing. So, and how we gauge how correct it is. So when you see the horse, feel the horse losing the rhythm, you know you have to do what you just did there, send the horse on back forward again, and just getting it swinging and active before we try anything. And that's the same thing we do anytime we make a mistake. You know, we don't beat horses up for making mistakes. You know, for instance, if they have a bad canter, we don't try to keep cantering or beat them up for it. We just come back, or for the transitions, always just coming back to what we could do before, getting the horse calm, and then try whatever that is that you tried again, whether that's a canter transition or a leg yield or whatever the case may be. We reestablish that forward swing and then let the horse relax again and then try again. Always remembering that most difficulties we have with horses are due to them not being able to do what we ask them to do. So great job, Carol. Still like to see the stretch a little bit deeper in the trot work, but you're doing great. I look forward to seeing the next one.